Welcome to Ably Seminars sessions. Today, we're going to talk about elements of value in real estate. For real estate to have value, it must also possess certain economic characteristics, which are referred to as the four elements of value. These are utility, scarcity, demand, and transferability. Utility, which is broadly defined as the power to render a service or fill a need. If the property has no use, regardless of how scarce, it probably won't have value. Hundreds of acres of preservation land, which has no utility, would not have high value. Although, I listed a property that was 300 acres, going over the Pali down to Kailua. And there are 300 acres of preservation land. My client bought it at a really low price, and it was preservation land. So he calls me up and says, "Hey, can you sell this property for me?" And I said, "How much do you want for it?" He says, $1.8 million. And I go, "But you only bought it for $80,000. And then he says, "Yeah, but I think it's worth more." So we put the property out to market, and sure enough, someone bid $1.8 million for that property. Because for that person, the utility was, what can I do with that property with that much land? Can I then create value? And he apparently thought so and made a really high offer. And so even though the utility to some people were not very visible to this buyer, he thought it was worth the money. And so utility is the ability to create the value and to find a way to increase that value to the investor. Now, property that is zoned hotel will have greater utility than agricultural land. Property that's apartment zoned or business zoned that has a high height limit will have more utility than a residential lot where you can build single-family homes. So on an acre and a half of land in, say, Kaka'ako or Kapiolani corridor, you could build a 350, 450-foot high building with 400 units. That's utility. Whereas if you had the same acreage of land and you had to build only houses, you might be lucky if you could get 8 to 10 homes. So the utility of a high-rise potential is much better than utility of a smaller lot, same lot size, but with less homes. So that's how developers and other people look at utility. How much is the land worth with the zoning, the height limit, and the number of units you can get on that property. Scarcity is considered in relation to supply and demand. So if any of us took economics class, the law of supply and demand says that if you have a high supply and low demand, then the prices are lower. But if you have high demand, low supply, then demand is higher and the prices should be higher. So you can have an item that might have great utility, be in high demand, and low supply, you're going to have a high price. High supply, low demand will create low price. So what's the difference between beachfront property and oceanfront property? Beachfront is when you can walk on the sand, and that is much greater in value than oceanfront property that might be fronting an ocean with rocks, with coral, and it's not usable for enjoyment. So scarcity will create value when there's a chance to have a much more desirable surroundings than not. And then, of course, if you have inland property, then it's less scarce and will have lower value. And property with gold or oil or minerals, that would have great value because it's scarce and the owner of that property could create a lot of income like they have on the mainland. Demand, we talked about already, which implies both the need and the existence of monetary power to satisfy that need will create the high price. So the law of supply and demand dictates the price of that property. Transferability is the ability to freely convey property ownership from one person to another, and that will create value. So even if you have factors of utility, scarcity, and demand, if the item is not transferable, very little value will exist. An example is, let's say there's title issues, that the property doesn't have clear title. The chain of title is broken. And so who would then lend on that property? lenders won't lend if there's no clear title. Title insurance companies will not create title insurance policy for property that is not transferable. So even though you have the land there, it may not be transferable because there are some other circumstances that might deter the value of the property. I was asked by a person who called me up and said, hey, we have some Hawaiian land on the island of Maui, and it's Kuleana land that we've got as an inheritance. So can we go take a look at it and give me an idea of what can be done to the property? So I got some background information that it was a Hawaiian family that had generations, I guess since Kamehameha, to own the land. When people died, they didn't clear title. They didn't open probate, close probate, and so the chain of title with all the descendants was not clear. So is that land transferable? Probably might be very difficult. So as we discussed it, I asked the person that was the trustee for that land, what do you want to do with it? And she said, well, I don't want to spend money on clearing title. It might cost us several $1,000s, might be a year or two, and there's no guarantee that we can get clear title. So at that point, they said, well, we're not going to go through with it. And they kept it in the family and continuing to have family members live there, but without what we call a clean chain of title. There was a piece of property on Kalani'anaʻoli Highway that we had looked at purchasing. And we were in escrow, and then the listing agent calls me up and says, hey, title company says that there's a break in the chain of title. And so we need to have about $3,000, and we need about 6 to 9 months to clear title. And I'm in escrow. And I said, well, what happens if I give you the money and then title doesn't clear? Then he said, oh, well, you lost your money. So I said, okay. So I took my risk, gave him the money, and in 6 to 9 months, they cleared title, and the families got what they wanted, and I got the property closed. So there are transferable issues, especially with land that has gone through many generations, and they do not have the clear title. I just had a call yesterday from a person that said, hey, my husband passed, and he was one of the owners. And there are 3 cousins that own the property together. 2 cousins are willing to sell the property, but the one cousin is adamant that he does not want to sell. So now there's transferability issues here because the one cousin that doesn't want to sell is going to make everything difficult, and we cannot get the transfer title signed by one of them. So now they have to go through court action, what they call a partition suit action, to try and clear the way for the property to be sold. So there's issues that could arise when the owners do not always agree. So that's why you have title insurance, and that's why you do title search, and that's why you have the title company do the searches to make sure there's clear title to the property. So I hope that gives you a better indication or idea of the types of value about utility, scarcity, demand, and transferability.